How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel. In this video I want to talk you through whether you should buy a manual or an automatic car, or whether you should even get a manual license in the first place. Let's get this out there straight away. I'm a big manual fan, so I've definitely got some bias on this topic, but I want to talk about it just from as objective a point of view as possible and discuss the pros and cons of each, as well as whether manuals are still going to be a thing in the future. And when I say that manual cars might disappear in the future, what I mean by that is that even though they make up the majority of cars on the road at the moment, automatics are supposed to overtake them by 2020. Since 2007, automatic sales have increased by 70%, and apparently in 2019, 99% of vehicles sold were automatic. That is absolutely insane. It means that manuals are literally just going out of the window. Not to mention the fact that electric cars are supposed to be exclusively on sale from 2032. And as we know, electric cars don't really need gears. So let's not forget that I'm from the UK, so in the UK we have a culture of driving manual cars in general, I would say. Correct me if I'm wrong. In countries like the US or Canada, it seems like there's a slightly bigger focus on driving automatic cars, at least from the stats I could find online. But this leads me on to the topic of the week, which is, what's better, a manual or an automatic? Which do you prefer? Let me know in the comments down below, as well as in the iCard poll that I'm putting up at the top, whatever side of the screen. Remember to like and subscribe for more weekly car content. Hit the notification bell as well if you want to stay up to date on my most recent uploads. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So let's get right into the meat of the discussion, the pros and cons of automatic and manual cars. Starting with automatics, let's look at the pros of having one. This has all come from a bunch of articles online that people have said about them, and also just from personal experience as well. So one, they're easier to drive. That's definitely the case. With an automatic, you don't have to think about changing gears. It all does it for you, so you can focus a lot more on just driving the car on the road. For example, you pull up to a busy junction, you want to pull out, don't have to think about changing gears, don't have to think about anything, just swaz the throttle down and on your way. Nice and easy, no fuss. On top of that as well, it's got a smoother ride. The gear changes are far more consistent. When you've got a human involved, inconsistency happens and you might screw up a gear, or you might lurch, or you might get the old kangarooing effect. But yes, generally a nice smooth ride, and that's why a lot of taxi drivers drive automatics. Kind of attached to both of those things, it's better in rush hour traffic. In addition, it might be better for your wallet in the longer term. Older automatics tended to be less fuel efficient than their manual counterparts, but today autos tend to be the more fuel efficient of the two. For example, one car with really poor fuel efficiency is the Chevy Camaro. In a manual, you'll get 23 miles per gallon, but in the automatic, you get 25 miles per gallon. So that's 2 extra miles per gallon. And in the long run, that might be better for your wallet. On top of that, for those of you who are less confident at driving, they're far easier to learn to drive in. It means you don't have to learn how to use gears, which makes life quite easy, but it also limits you because you can't drive a manual car in future unless you do a manual test after that. Also, older automatic cars tended to be slower than their manual counterparts, but these days automatics seem to be slightly quicker. So for example, the Porsche 911 GT3, the automatic is at 0.6 seconds faster than the manual, just simply because the computer can change your gears way faster than you can. Let's look at the cons of automatic cars. Generally, if you've got an automatic car, it's going to be more expensive than its manual version. Sometimes, but not always, the insurance can be slightly more expensive on an automatic car. It allows for quite lazy driving. I'm not assuming that people who drive automatics are lazy drivers. That's not the case. You can actually theoretically have way more focus on the roads, but it does allow for the opportunity to be lazier, which means that you might take your mind off of the road for a second, and then bad things can happen. One key flaw for me is the fact that in older cars, the automatic gearbox tends to be the part of the car that goes wrong and costs a lot of money. In my many top 5 videos that I've done, you look through and see what actually goes wrong with these older cars. It's almost always the automatic gearbox. They go lurchy, they start spitting oil out of them, the computer stops changing gear at the right time. All sorts of problems can happen with automatic gearbox, particularly on older cars. And finally, this is just opinion, so feel free to ignore it. Sometimes they can be a little bit more boring than your average manual car. For example, I love my MX-5 with its manual gearbox. If I'd bought the automatic, I would have not been able to have anywhere near as much fun in it. The ability to kind of drag out gears all the way through to the end and let the car rev at the high revs it's supposed to be doing is really, really fun. Having control over that gearbox for me is just a good thing. That brings us nicely onto the pros of manual cars. You've got greater control over the gearbox. If you need a little bit of extra grunt on a hill, you can just drop it down a gear, nice and easy. And I appreciate you tend to be able to do that in more modern automatic cars as well, particularly with the flappy paddle gearboxes and all that good stuff. But there's still a computer involved, and in many cars it sometimes thinks it's not the right gear for you or whatever it is. You don't have any computer getting in the way of you changing gear in your manual car. They tend to be cheaper to maintain and easier to work on. It tends to be because of the computer involved. So in some automatics you've got a TCU, a transmission control unit, which handles the transmission on its own. Having a TCU and an ECU and all that electrical stuff can be quite difficult to work on and quite expensive to work on too. On that point, I've mentioned it a fair bit already, but it's less reliant on a computer. One of of my favourite cars on the planet is the Brabus Roadster. I think it is such a cool little car with really great potential. It just looks amazing and theoretically drives amazing, apart from the fact that it's got an ECU and a TCU setup, which absolutely ruins the gearbox. When you want to drive the car fast and change up gears and just have that quick response, it's not like driving a supercar. You're not just going like gear to gear to gear to gear. It's drive, click, revs drop significantly, next gear comes in and on it goes again. And that just ruins the experience, at least for me. I know that some people would think differently about the Brabus Roadster and I appreciate that, but for me, that loss of revs just kills it. I would have bought a Brabus Roadster over my MX-5 if it wasn't for that fact. I mentioned it in the cons for the autos, but manuals are generally cheaper to buy than their automatic counterparts. For example, the BRZ that I mentioned before is £2,000 cheaper for the manual version versus the auto version. And the final pro I wanted to talk about is the ability to learn more skills. So for example, heel toe, rev matching, all that good stuff, it's all stuff that you do with a manual car as opposed to an automatic. It's not all good stuff though, there are some cons. One of those is that it's not as safe theoretically to drive a manual car. Every time you want to change gear, you have to take a hand off the steering wheel. Another one is leg ache, and this is a real issue. If you're in significantly bad traffic, going on and off the clutch all the time and switching between the brake and the clutch and all that kind of stuff all the time can get quite tiring on your legs, particularly for people that skip leg day. Also, even though I mentioned the gearbox being a bad point on automatic cars in terms of maintenance and repairs, your gearbox very much depends on how previous owners have driven the car if you've bought a used one. If you've had a previous owner of your car that's absolutely ruined that gearbox and crunched the gears constantly and paid no attention to kind of maintenance of the gearbox, you're not in a great place. Also, another simple one, it requires more effort. You have to actually do something to change gear. You don't have to do that in automatic. Simple. Finally, it's more difficult to get the absolute max out of it. With an automatic box, the computer can automatically work out what's best for you to do. With a manual car, it's all up to you. You have to multitask and think, right, what gear do I need to be in to do this corner at this speed and to get out of that junction nice and quickly. That's all in your brain as opposed to the car just sorting it out for you. And so take what you will from those pros and cons, but I want to talk a bit more generally about manuals and automatics. So I put out a poll on Instagram asking you guys what you thought of manuals versus automatics. Which do you prefer? And according to that poll, 198 votes were for manual and 34 were for automatic, which means that 85% of you preferred manual. By the way, if you don't follow me on Instagram, it's at CarsWithJB. I'm trying to hit 1,000 followers by the end of the year and I'm on 900 something at this point, so I'd really appreciate if you guys jumped in and got involved. But anyway, that was the results. It doesn't really mean anything, to be perfectly honest. Sadly, you guys aren't a representative sample of the world's population. People that follow me on Instagram, I suppose, must like cars and therefore have some kind of skin in the game when it comes to cars. So just because you're a car enthusiast and you like manuals, or you're a car enthusiast and you like automatics, doesn't matter. Ultimately, what I suppose really matters to manufacturers is what everyone buys. And as I said, 99% of the vehicles sold in 2019 so far have been automatics. So clearly, they are more popular in terms of sales. It's simple. And that leads me on to whether or not manuals will even survive. You might be sitting there at home having not taken your test yet thinking, do I really need a manual license or can I get away with just having an automatic one? If you're watching this video in 15 years time, I would definitely suggest getting just an automatic license. Every new car that gets sold by then will probably be electric or likely not a manual. I think that's in part due to the development of automatic boxes over the years. It was 1904 when the first automatic box came into existence, and since then, cars have come a very long way, quite clearly. Companies like Mercedes have put so much time and effort into making automatic cars that work and that last a longer time. And Mercedes' audience has seemed to just lap it up time and time again, to the point at which the majority of Mercedes that you'll see on the road now are automatic. The gearboxes are getting more suitable, more usable, more reliable, and generally better for the consumer. They're also faster, more intelligent, they're just generally better than you with your hand and a stick. On top of that, as I mentioned briefly at the start, we're starting to move into the era of electric cars. And if we do, as people are saying, go towards electric cars exclusively, they have no real need for gearboxes. Maybe seen that the new Porsche Taycan has actually got 2 gears to it, but even then you don't change it with your hands, it just gets on with it. So if one would ask whether manuals will even be a thing in the future, and though I personally really enjoy driving a manual car and I like sticking the car in one gear and revving it out and doing drifts in a manual car and all that kind of stuff, they will likely get phased out. Now let's summarize everything I've spoken about in this video very quickly. To the person sitting at home wondering whether they should buy a manual car or get a manual license, you should do exactly that. If you like having control over your gearbox, you like or can only afford older cars, use your car for more than just a daily commute, particularly a city commute. You want to be a rally driver or a racing driver in the future. And if you want completely unlimited choice of the next car that you want to drive. And I say that because if you get an automatic license in the UK, it costs the exact same amount as a manual license, but you can only drive automatic cars from then on. You cannot drive a manual car with an automatic license, but you can drive an automatic car with a manual license. Therefore, you have more choice on what your next car should be if you have a manual license. Alternatively, you should get an automatic license or car if you live in the city and rarely ever leave it. It'll be much easier getting around town. You won't have to think about changing gears so much. If you only use the car for commuting, I would not lose anything from driving to and from the station in an automatic car in the mornings. If you can afford to buy new automatic cars with good gearboxes, 100% go for it. You might get a car with better performance if that's the case. If you're rich enough to buy supercars for your whole life, definitely get yourself an automatic car. Why bother getting a manual license? The vast majority of supercars out there are automatic, so no need for a manual. Although that does mean that you miss out on some really great manual supercars as well, so I'd probably still get a manual license. And of course, if you're watching this video in like 15 years time, get an automatic license. What are you doing bothering even watching this video? Go back to your futuristic life. Anyway, whatever license or car you go for, whether it's an automatic or a manual, don't let anyone harass you about it. If someone's giving you hate for the gearbox that you have in your car, that's such a waste man thing to be angry about. Like, imagine being that guy who sits there like, oh, that's a manual gearbox in that car? That means you're a dickhead? What a waste of a thing to be angry about. People need to chill when it comes to that kind of stuff. Anyway, I hope this video helped a few people. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some stuff about automatics and manuals and whether you should choose one or the other. As always, a massive thanks to my patrons who are all on screen right now. You guys are absolute carnage. I really appreciate your additional support to the channel. Remember to follow me on Instagram to get me to that 1,000. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Listen.